So I can't believe that I gave you the history of Southern Democrats without telling you what they believe in, specifically as it pertains to Black civil rights. So let's talk about that, shall we? I think I gave a hint the last time when I talked about the fracture between Northern Democrats and Southern Democrats, and it came down to slavery, right? Right. The Northern Democrats thought that the territories should be able to vote on slavery, on whether or not they should have slavery, while the Southern Democrats were like, no, no, we think everybody should have slavery, right? Before the Civil War, the Southern Democrats were the party of slavery, which is kind of obvious. This was the party that wanted slavery to be expanded from sea to shining sea. Southern Democrats insisted on protecting slavery in all the territories. They're the reason why the Fugitive Slave Acts existed in the Constitution. We have states like South Carolina to thank for that. They're the ones that insisted, I think it was the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 that made all states complicit, saying that no matter where enslaved people ran to, they needed to be brought back to their owners, regardless of where they ran. Because prior to that, as long as they made it to the north, they were okay. They just needed to make it to the north. After the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, they had to make it all the way to Canada to ensure that they were not dragged back to their enslaver. We have the Southern Democrats to thank for that. After the Civil War, most white Southerners opposed radical Reconstruction, duh, because the Union had eventually radical Republicans had broken the Confederate States, former Confederate States, into 5 military districts, and they were under military control until they were allowed back into the Union. And there were certain steps that needed to be taken, things like rewriting their constitution to allow for all men, black and white, to be able to vote. They had to do things like that. They had to ratify the 14th and the 15th Amendment. They had to ratify the 13th Amendment. However, Southern Democrats did not support Black civil rights. They did not support Black political rights. They opposed the 14th and the 15th Amendments. Those were the amendments that gave Blacks citizenship, equality, and the right to vote. And obviously, they opposed the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery. During Reconstruction, when Andrew Johnson was president, it was the Southern Democrats that passed the Black Codes. Black Codes were laws passed to restrict the rights of formerly enslaved people. These laws were a continuation of the slave codes from before the war, but they also granted some limited civil rights because they had to. However, the Black Codes were designed to limit the economic, political, and social freedom of Blacks. Through the Black Codes came the vagrancy laws. They criminalized men who were out of work, who were not working at a job whites recognized. And from there came convict leasing, a system in which state prisons hired out convicts for labor. According to Douglas A. Blackman, convict leasing was another form of slavery. He described it as a system in which armies of free men guilty of no crimes and entitled by law to freedom were compelled to labor without compensation, were repeatedly bought and sold, and were forced to do the bidding of white masters through the regular application of extraordinary physical coercion. Essentially, It was a new way to keep Black people, specifically Black men, enslaved.